This turned into this. Listen how quiet it gets. Also, what was more surprising part of this video? That Shaq still pushes off like this, or that Shaq can still dunk like this? You thought that video was old, didn't you, Jay?
Reebok logo? Not a basketball
It's around the
Hey,
horn.
Reebok logo on the court today? Yeah, that is kind of...
Here's
Jake Armiento.
What's up, guys? This is Around the Horn. I'm your host here today, Jake Armiento, and here are my fellow analysts, Woody Page, Jed Sawyer, and Kimbo Slice. The question here today is, should college athletes be paid? So, athletes like Kevin Ware, who have had devastating injuries and have large medical bills, should they be compensated by schools? We'll start off with you, Jed.
So, if we're talking about injuries in NCAA sports, you have to consider that football and basketball are pretty much the only sports in which athletes are really getting injured. There was 841 injuries last year in NCAA football. There were spinal injuries, but that was only of 12,000 players. So you have to consider sports like tennis, swimming, all these other sports where athletes aren't getting injured, and the compensation for these minority of athletes alone isn't worth them needing to get paid for it. It's a very small percentage of the athletes who actually are getting injured here.
Yeah, so that might be true, but there's still a lot of injuries, and these injuries can be devastating. 7.5% of all college athlete injuries are concussions, and 50% are lower limb injuries. Both of these can cause a lot more issues down the line later in life, and so these athletes should definitely be compensated for injury, and should definitely be paid if they're putting themselves in risk for these injuries.
Not even listening to the long-term effects, but the short-term effects can have a big impact. A lot of these players lose their scholarships and aren't able to have an education, and then they're also not able to pay for their medical bills.
Alright, sorry. I hear where you're coming from, sorry, like I know what you're saying, but I mean, these are really well-conditioned athletes, and when they come out of high school and go into college, they know what they're getting into and they know the risks they're taking, and that's therefore their responsibility. So, I mean, they really shouldn't get paid for, I mean, it's on them if they get injured.
Jed. Please, don't patronize us, Jed.
Alright, listen up, Cupcake. These athletes do know what they're getting into, but for many of them, they're getting into it because they're trying to make a career of it after school. And once they become a professional, if they get injured, they're still given the money that's owed to them in their contract. However, if they're a student athlete and they get injured, their career might be over, and on top of that, they'll lose their scholarship and have to pay a certain amount of hospital bills potentially. So it just isn't fair at all.
Nowadays, college athletes are more like celebrities. I was wondering, why shouldn't they get a cut of it if they're bringing such big money to colleges?
College sports is a humongous industry. Schools like Alabama bring in $123 million yearly due to these sports programs. Why are the athletes who, without them, they couldn't even be making any money at all, how are they not getting any of the money at all?
Okay, so contrary to what Sawyer was saying, on top of that you might see, $123 million, that's a lot of money, but this doesn't include the expenses, which is also just about $123 million, and a school like Alabama last year only made a total profit of about $400,000. So really it's not enough to pay the players and keep the programs running. So, I mean, that's just for Alabama also. There's many other schools that don't make nearly that much money. Only 5 schools made more than $100 million last year. So you have to remember that there's a lot of schools that don't make nearly as much money as programs such as the Big Ten or the SEC.
The NCAA makes 81% of their money off of televised events. Those sports which aren't televised are the ones really dragging those revenue numbers, or those expense numbers rather, down, and making it such a close race between revenue and expenses. Without those non-spectator sports and non-televised sports, you have a huge profit margin, which includes mostly football and basketball.
A lot of pro athletes use their first paycheck and spend it in ridiculous ways, wasting all their money away. Do you think that this payment would lead them to making better financial decisions?
I do believe the athlete should be paid a small amount.
Elaborate on that.
In order to avoid situations of these athletes going bankrupt, like Allen Iverson, for example, they shouldn't be given millions of dollars like all these pro athletes are. However, it would be fair to give them a smaller amount to keep them financially open and able to pay for things, but not too much money for them to go over the top.
No, I don't think it would affect their financial credibility at all because you have 18-year-olds and 18-year-olds are even more immature than 21, 22-year-olds who just got drafted. So if you're starting to give these kids money now, they're going to be even more immature with it and not learn anything because, they're out winning games and trying to win championships. They're not really focused on the money they made. And if you're giving them more money, they're going to be even more immature with it because they're in college and they're not even a pro yet. They're not going to hire any consultants or anything like that. And it honestly just gives them more of a chance to mess up the money.
So I actually think that this would help athletes be better with their money because when players get drafted, they go from making no income to making hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars a year. And that's a jump that's very difficult for anyone to make, especially a lot of athletes from low-income households. It's something that they can't really deal with. But if when they're playing in college, they're making a normal salary, a normal income, it would definitely prepare them more for handling money.
Kimbo, what do you think? Oh, you're not here today. Shit. The hottest topic in this debate is scholarships enough?
Yeah, I think they are enough.
Elaborate on that.
So for most Division I, Division II, even Division III athletes, the athletes that get full or even half scholarships make up more than enough of a salary. If a school is $60,000 and they get a 4-year full ride, that's $240,000 that an athlete is getting, and that for me is a reasonable enough quote-unquote salary for that student athlete. And even for many athletes that come from these low-income neighborhoods, it's their only opportunity at going to college, and for them that really should be enough with the addition of the scholarship to make up for any salary.
Scholarships definitely aren't enough because they only cover education and tuition, not the cost of living. So for example, Arian Foster, when he was an NCAA athlete playing football, he was at practice all day, every day. He didn't have time to work and make money on the side, and because of that, he often didn't have enough money to eat. And so he didn't have enough money to eat because he was practicing, but since he didn't have enough food, he was unhealthy and he was not performing well in practice. So he definitely could have benefited from getting some extra money other than just his scholarship.
They're enough, but they're not really enough.
Elaborate on that.
These scholarships given out to athletes are mostly for the academic side of college. So that doesn't account for the whole athletic side, which they should be compensated for. Additionally, some athletes either don't earn a scholarship or can't earn a scholarship, such as those in the Ivy Leagues, and have to work just as, if not harder, in order to maintain their spot on the team.
The NCAA is such a big organization, bringing in $872 million a year. How do you determine who gets paid how much and from who?
One of the reasons that I definitely think it's going to be very hard or difficult to pay all these NCAA athletes is the question of where and how the money will be distributed to these athletes. For example, there are these big game, Big Ten athletes that make lots of money, and then you also have Division III tennis or golf or baseball players who aren't really that well known and don't bring in a lot of revenue for the school. Additionally, the question of where to get this money from is very difficult because the NCAA is a non-for-profit, so would they have to give the money? Would the schools have to pay the money? Would the conference have to pay the money?
I think that if athletes were to be paid, it would be most fair for it to be based off of an approximation of the amount of money they're bringing into their school. And since they're directly bringing money into the school, it should be the school that's returning them the favor by giving them an amount of money, a salary.
To piggyback off of what Sawyer was saying, I agree that salary should be based off of how much money a player is approximated to bring into the school. However, with the $872 million that the NCAA makes, the money should be coming from there. However, the only sports I feel that should be paid are the football and basketball, which are easily the two largest markets of a sport in college sports.
Score update. Jed, 5 points. Sawyer, 7 points. And Woody Page, a whopping 53 points.
Only 7 points? This is ridiculous.
Huh, Sawyer, you're right. That is ridiculous. New score update. Jed, still at 5 points. Woody Page, still at 53. But Sawyer, I changed my mind. You're at .3 now.
This is ridiculous. How dare you, sir? How dare you?
Oh, shoot. Alright, we got 5 minutes left, guys. Any final thoughts?
Alright, so just one last thing that I was kind of thinking about was the rule of Title IX, which states that men and women need to be paid equally or treated equally in terms of sports in all schools. And so if you take the example of, say, University of Michigan football, or basketball rather, if there's more male athletes than female athletes, proportionally say it's 60% male athletes compared to only 40% female athletes, that means that the male athletes are bringing in more and then therefore most likely going to get paid more by the school, which would be in violation of Title IX, which basically just complicates paying athletes, period, which is almost in a sense unconstitutional to pay the male athletes more. So I think in general it would just be safer to not pay them, period.
One of the biggest pros of these athletes getting money is it incentivizes them to stay for all 4 years of college. A lot of athletes leave after 1, 2, even 3 years, and they're without an education. They make it to the professionals, and then they can't find their way. They get stuck in some sort of minor league system, and they're never making enough money, and then they have to find a job without 4 years of education, or they can go, or they'll have to go back to school and finish out their education.
Alright, that's all the time we have here today on Around the Horn. Congratulations to the winner, Woody Page, with 63 points in total.
You know, another win doesn't faze me. Losses don't faze me. I win all the time. I lose all the time. You know, shout out D. Gurns. Shout out Kimbo Slice. Shout out all the NCAA athletes that I'm currently repping and trying to get paid. Be out.